it would be good if we can really go into this, what is known as being addicted to a certain experience. There is this notion that circulates around that being addicted to bliss is still an addiction. And I thought it would be good if we can go and talk a little bit about it. First, we need to understand what bliss is so that we can see if we can be addicted to it and if we can call it addiction. Because it is true, from the standpoint of view of experience, whenever something is experienced, it generates a latent tendency for a future experience. And we have spoken about it on the first day, I think, of our gathering, how that whole accumulation of vasanas takes place. And from the yogic perspective, it's very well explained, very well delivered, have been spoken about. These vasanas are literally psychic or psychological tendencies. These tendencies lay sediment deep within our psyche, in the recesses. And whenever the time is ripe, one or another, a few of them together, a bunch of them, simply surface. The very philosophy of yoga, when spoken from the perspective, let's say, delivered by Patanjali through his aphorisms on yoga, deals with this with crystal clarity. How these vasanas are generated, and the whole business of a yogi then is to uproot the very possibility for this to happen. And there is even this scriptural example given in the scripture of comparing it with roasting the seeds. So even if there are seeds still in a latent form, the repeated exposure to samadhi literally roasts the seeds. They become impotent. They're still there, but they fail to produce crops. They fail to sprout. Simple as that. In other words, even when there are psychic tendencies within any given individual, and if he's undergone through that process, then this psychic tendencies simply ineffective. This is just to really explaining it in a nutshell. And because of that understanding, and not only because of that understanding, but in general, this understanding is supported by direct experience. We ate a certain meal, let's say, for the first time. There's a new restaurant open around the corner, what have you, and you tried that meal, and let's say that was for the first time, and you enjoyed it. Already, one could say, there is a possibility that you sown a seed to re-experience that again. Maybe that's why some of us keep going back to, trying to test the same food we like. There's this reoccurrence. But that's just an example about food. It's relevant to every experience, absolutely every experience. So this is a principle of attraction and aversion again. Attraction and aversion. Something we're attracted to and something we're averted to. Both creates this psychic reflex. Both creates this possibility for experience, laying a seed for a future experience to sprout, grow, and manifest itself in the form of desire, a form of thought, and a form of action. So it's very clear, I hope. Is it clear or not?
Yes.
So, And then there is this talk, also there is this notion that, oh, you know what, this bliss, I'm experiencing bliss. Well, and then immediately you hear so-and-so saying that, well, it's the same thing, you're just getting attached to bliss. Become addicted, you become a bliss junkie. So let's talk about it a little bit, just briefly, so that there is a clear understanding. As far as the experience and all these vasanas are concerned, it is all happening on the level, right, obviously of the human organism, how it perceives this in a state which is technically known as avidya, in other words, not knowing, another term for ignorance, that the term avidya. And bliss itself belongs to a very different category in terms of any experience that we here undergo. And I invite you to look back to some of the expositions where we've talked about the very substratum of consciousness, when we've talked about the very fabric of consciousness, which is known in Indian spirituality as Sat Chit Ananda. Yeah, which is also translated variously, but essentially it is, what it means is that which is Sat, right, which is true, which is eternal, that which is Chit, which stands for consciousness itself, and that which is Ananda, which stands for bliss. Sat Chit Ananda is not something which comes and goes. It's the ground of experience itself. In other words, every experience takes place in bliss, in consciousness, eternally. So the equation is kind of solved already. How something which by its very nature permanent, something which is a substratum, cause to be an addiction. By very definition, addiction is something which is experienced and then there is a lack of it. Right? It's weighing down, what have you. So you have to go back and re-experience it. So this is very, very simple. Whether it's a drug, food, favorite activity, addiction, by definition, is that which has duration. You're experiencing it during that duration, and then, when it wanes down, you want more. And that is known as addiction. You then, obviously, become addicted to whatever that substance is. So let us see, is it possible to be addicted to bliss? Because one could argue and say that, you know what, I don't experience bliss 24/7, I don't experience bliss permanently. So it kind of does sound logic to conclude that if I experience bliss now and I really love that, then I won't experience tomorrow. So aren't I addicted to bliss? Well, no. Why? Because this as a substratum of consciousness, bliss itself is that which illumines experience. As a primal quality of consciousness, bliss and consciousness are inseparable. Hence, Sat Chit Ananda are always spelled together traditionally. Sat Chit Ananda is one word in a way. It's one word with one meaning. It's that first, if you will, quality of consciousness within consciousness. So it's not experience at all. It's a normal state of being. normal. I want to emphasize, it's normal. Just like it's normal for the sun to shine. It's not an addiction for a sun to shine. It just shines. In the same way, consciousness is blissful by its very own nature. It's blissful by definition, but it's also blissful, which experience of that tells us. However, in this case, it's simply an error of language. We say that my meditation is filled with bliss. Is that an experience or a normal state? Now you know it. It's your normal state. So whenever you feel that joy for no reason, it might not necessarily be wildly intense. It is what you're experiencing your own consciousness. You're experiencing not only your own consciousness, you're experiencing a quality of your own consciousness.